Hello, friends. Would you like to know how to win fights? Well, I'm going to talk about the best way to win a fight in today's episode. Welcome to the Case for Life podcast. I'm Scott Klusendorf, your host. I want to remind you of our primary sponsor, Life Training Institute. If you would like to look at a speaker or someone to come to your event and teach pro-life apologetics, we can provide that for you, and you can take a look at our sites to see where you can contact us in that regard. I want to talk today about fighting. Now, this is a little different than what we usually talk about on this show, which is aimed at equipping you to engage the pro-life argument with those who disagree. But there is something troubling to me that is happening more and more, and I'm going to take a few minutes here to just kind of talk. Maybe it'll seem off the cuff, maybe it'll seem a bit unrehearsed, but so what? Here goes. I watched an amazing funeral this last weekend. It was that of Dr. John MacArthur, who many of you know, the great preaching pastor at Grace Community Church in the Los Angeles area. And I watched his memorial service online, and it was just excellent from top to bottom. I mean, the Gettys are leading the worship. You had speakers like Johnny Erickson Tata. You had people that John had known that attested to his faithfulness in ministry. The hymn singing was just spectacular. 120 voice choir. I mean, just top shelf stuff. But I'm going to tell you what my biggest takeaway was. It wasn't the Gettys leading worship, though that was just outstanding. When is it not outstanding when they're doing it? But my takeaway was this. There were a couple of speakers there that I knew did not agree with John MacArthur on every point. And the two speakers I'm referencing are Alistair Begg, the recently retired great preacher from Cleveland, and John Piper, who runs Desiring God Ministries. Now, I know that both men have had their debates with John on certain issues. And I'm not going to rehearse all that here. It's not important. But here's what is important. They remained friends and they remained committed to the goal each of them was following, which was to get the gospel message out to as many people as possible. And though they disagreed on some secondary issues, they were absolutely united in their effort to see Christ glorified, to see the gospel preached, and see people come to a saving faith in Christ. No doubt about that. And it was refreshing to watch a memorial service where you had people giving tribute to John MacArthur who didn't agree with him on everything. And I think there's a lesson there for us to learn, not only as Christians, but as pro-lifers. Too often, I think there's this tendency to force a strident division point when there doesn't have to be one. And I referenced at the start of the show a strategy for winning fights. And let me tell you what I'm thinking here. I actually have a book somewhere behind me on those shelves called How to Win Fights. And it's interesting what the very first strategy they advance is. Here it is. Avoid the fight. Don't have it. Avoid it. That's a win. It's a W when you can walk away from a fight you don't need to have. And pro-lifers, I think there are some fights we're having we don't need to be having internally. I think what tends to happen with pro-lifers is we get in our little tribes and we are convinced that anybody that doesn't agree with us is not merely mistaken, they're downright evil, they want children to die, and they're finding a way to profit by being involved in pro-life activism. I think this is just a bad way to poison the well. It attributes to those you disagree with the worst possible motives, and I think we need to do better. So I'm going to give you some examples of where I see this happening in the pro-life cause. And then I want us to think again about that funeral that just happened this weekend for John MacArthur, where there were people who had disagreements with him, but they knew where they were united. They knew where they needed to focus their efforts for the larger cause. And there's a lesson for us to learn there as pro-lifers. All right. So are there things that, as a pro-lifer, I think we need to divide over and draw very strong lines? Yes. I'll give you one. We absolutely must draw a line in the sand between those of us who want to work to save children from abortion and those who are coming along from largely the political evangelical and Catholic left, telling us that we're not legitimately pro-life unless we become, as they put it, whole life, take on every other life issue under the sun. Their argument basically goes like this: to have a consistent pro-life ethic, you have to not only be against killing unborn lives, you have to be in favor of supporting refugee lives, immigrant lives, whether they're here legally or not. You've got to support an open border. You've got to be willing to fight for higher taxes so more government money can go to help the poor. You have to be willing to be against war or capital punishment. I mean, the list goes on and on. And I think as pro-lifers, we must absolutely, with every fiber in us, resist mission drift that says to be legitimately pro-life, you have to take on a whole bunch of other issues. Just from a pragmatic viewpoint, let's just set aside for the moment everything else, just pragmatically. How can we expect a pro-life movement that is largely bankrupt? I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't know many pro-life organizations rolling in the dough. Rather, most of us are operating on shoestring budgets, trying to do the best we can with very limited resources. And to come along and tell pro-lifers, all right, now you have to divert your resources to take on all these other causes. I mean, that's ridiculous. As we have said on this show before, imagine someone saying to the American Cancer Society, you're not a legitimate medical organization because you only fight one disease, not all of them. How come you're not taking on heart disease? How come you're not taking on diabetes? How come you're not taking on lupus or Crohn's disease? All you do is fight cancer. You're not really pro-medicine. You're just anti-cancer. You don't count. Well, that's a ridiculous argument, but pro-lifers essentially are told the same thing all the time. The basic, undefended, and hidden premise in the whole life argument goes like this: because you oppose the intentional killing of an innocent human being, you have to fix everything wrong with society. Well, that's just an unfair, ridiculous claim to make, and I'm saddened that a lot of pro-lifers are buying it. Even in pregnancy center ministry, we're hearing pregnancy centers be told by groups that say, you know, being pro-life isn't enough. You have to be pro-abundant life. And by that, that means you got to take on discipling believers. You have to take on building strong families. You have to take on fatherhood initiatives. And you have to take on religious liberty causes. You just gave pregnancy center workers a back-breaking job description that will not only bankrupt their ministries, but burn out people in the field at a rate that none of us can afford to see happen. So I am going to draw a line and say, if you are dealing with people who claim to be pro-life, but they want to send us on a route that's going to result in horrendous mission drift and burn our people out in a way that is just unjust to the core, I'm going to oppose that. And I'm going to draw a very hard line in the sand and say, don't listen to those people. We must divide from them. That is different, though, than someone who comes along and says, you know, I'm pro-life, I want to save babies, but I don't think we should be using graphic pictures of abortion to do that. I think that's not the best strategy. Okay, I deal with that all the time. And here's the way I deal with it. I do the best I can to convince them that using the pictures will actually be the most loving and persuasive thing we can do. But at the end of the day, if they dig in and they're not going to let me show a video of abortion at a pregnancy center banquet or some other event I'm at, I agree to work with them anyway. And here's why. Not because I think they're correct. I absolutely think they're wrong. But we don't need to have a division fight over this. We don't need to divide and say, well, you're not legitimately pro-life because you disagree with me on the pictures. That's an example of this. Here's another one. I've encountered some pro-life events that refuse to allow a Catholic speaker because Catholic and Protestants don't agree theologically. And by the way, we don't. Let's be upfront about that. We have very different views of both justification and authority. There's not a way to bridge the two views together. So I get that we should not have co-confession. But it doesn't follow that I shouldn't work with Catholics to stop abortion. In fact, I'm willing to work with anyone to stop abortion if I don't have to give up my own core convictions to do it. And no Catholic has ever said to me, I need you to affirm the sacred place of honor that the Virgin Mary has, and I need you to affirm that praying to her is right and good, and I need you to affirm that the Eucharist is the correct way to approach our relationship with a living Christ. I have never affirmed any of those things, nor will I, and I've never been asked to. But some Protestants I have seen refuse to work with good Catholics who want to stop the killing. Now, we cannot agree theologically, but we can agree to be co-belligerents. We can agree, for example, that we are going to do the best we can to teach a biblically grounded view of human value. And Catholics and Protestants agree on that. We agree in the Imago Dei. We agree that humans have intrinsic value in virtue of what they are. We reject a performance view of human value that says, hey, our value comes from immediately exercisable functions we perform, like brain cognitive development, like feelings, sensation, ability to interact with our environments, or whatever other thing people throw out as being decisive. Protestants and Catholics both agree those are faulty ways to view the human person. And Protestants and Catholics should work together for legislation that protects the unborn, and they should work together to reach out to those at risk for abortion to save their children. There should be no debate about that. But some people want to make it theological when it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. I've seen it go the other way too. There have been a couple of times I have been banned from speaking after being scheduled to speak at a pro-life event because I would not sign a form about contraception or about some other Catholic doctrine. Because I would not affirm that, I was deemed not appropriate for that conference. Now, let me be clear. I think event organizers are absolutely free to choose whoever they want to speak at their event. I don't have a problem with that. But I think it's kind of suspect when you book a speaker known to have expertise in a particular field. In fact, you're convinced he or she is the best possible person to bring in to teach on a particular subject, but then you force that person to sign a statement of faith, or what amounts to a statement of faith, on an issue that is largely unrelated to the subject the speaker is going to address. That's where it starts to get unnecessarily divisive, and it doesn't need to be. All you do there is divide people into tribes. Instead, if you really are concerned about it, don't invite the speaker who might disagree with you on a secondary issue in the first place. Now, I think it's a tragedy in Christian circles that we think we have to have absolute agreement on everything before someone can come in as a specialist and address the field they actually have expertise in. I don't talk about contraception in my pro-life talks. I don't talk about the age of the earth. That's another one that I got attacked on once. I was scheduled at a conference and they bumped me out of it because I would not sign a statement saying it is absolutely heretical to teach that the earth is anything but 7,000 years old. Well, I don't talk about the age of the earth when I teach pro-life apologetics. I do assume intelligent design in my arguments, absolutely. But I don't have to get into a debate about how old is the earth in order to effectively teach pro-life apologetics. But some people want to make that secondary issue the issue, and it ends up dividing us in ways that it doesn't need to. And not only that, we don't learn from people that we might learn from. Okay, I make no bones about it. I am a Protestant evangelical. If you want to know the truth, I'm a 5-pointer when it comes to Calvinism, okay? I absolutely believe in Reformed theology. I am a Protestant to the core of my being. I have a Protestant and what I believe to be a biblical view of justification. I believe all spiritual authority is finally grounded in the Bible itself, and that is sufficient for us. Okay, so there's no doubt my distinction is Protestant. But have I learned from some Catholic moral theologians who have put forth just outstanding pro-life arguments? You better believe it. I have benefited greatly from people like Francis J. Beckwith, Catholic, Peter Kreeft, Catholic, Hadley Arkes, Catholic, Robert George, Catholic, Patrick Lee, Catholic. They are devout Catholics, but they have put forth pro-life arguments that are very helpful for those of us teaching apologetics, and I can use those arguments and benefit from what I've learned from them without being asked to compromise my Protestant distinctives. But I think it's a very small-minded person who says, I will not learn from anybody except those who agree with me right down the line on every issue, secondary or not. Now, there's another way this is playing out in pro-life circles today, and this one disturbs me greatly, and that has to do with a small group of people who oppose abortion called abolitionists. Now, even here, even though I disagree with many of the concepts in abolitionism, I do believe that we ought to be open-minded and listen to what each other has to say. Here's my concern with abolitionism. It's not that they have ideas different than my own. For those of you that might be unfamiliar with the debate between abolitionists and pro-lifers, abolitionists believe that anything other than a complete ban on abortion and a ban now that also punishes women for murder is going to fall into the zone of compromise. And they believe that any incremental steps to limit the evil of abortion are ultimately in principle compromised. I disagree with that. However, I think I should be willing to hear what they have to say about tactics for more effectively advancing legislation. Let's have that in-house debate without demonizing one another. The problem is the vast majority of abolitionists that I have dealt with are not willing to have a good faith debate about prudence and political strategy and what's realistically possible in today's culture. Rather, they immediately go from, here's our bill, why won't you support it, to the only reason you won't support it is A, you're compromised, and B, you want abortion to continue so you can continue to make money on it. I've actually had abolitionists tell me this. The only reason you're not an abolitionist is because you're making money being pro-life, and you are getting your livelihood paid for, you're profiting off of abortion by going out and speaking on it. Let me tell you something. I'm a pretty good public speaker. If I wanted to make a lot of money in public speaking, I don't choose a topic like abortion, where most of the time I don't get paid anything to speak. And even when I do, it's not on the level that a professional speaker talking about life coaching or talking about how to have a positive value of yourself or how to make it in a career field. I could make a lot more money speaking for Fortune 500 companies, motivating their employees, making that circuit, than I will talking about an issue that almost nobody wants to talk about and showing videos that make people vomit their lunch. I mean, obviously, I've chosen a field because I am in principle dedicated to saving children. But the thing that I hear from abolitionists is when they have a bill, and I've had them approach me, they'll put forward a bill and it will say the following: we want to protect all unborn humans from conception. Okay, so far so good. But then they say, and we want women who have abortions to be subject to the same penalties for murder that other women are who kill their children. All right, now we have a prudence issue to discuss. We agree in principle that all unborn humans should be protected in law. No debate about that. But I think there is a prudence question to ask here, and that is, in a culture that already thinks pro-lifers hate women and want them to die, is it wise to lead with bills that say, we want women prosecuted for murder who have abortions. We want them thrown in jail and go to the gas chamber, electric chair, lethal injection, whatever. And by the way, the other side will play all those things up. Is it wise in that kind of culture to advance a bill about penalties that maybe we ought to table that for another day? Maybe we let the culture catch up to the fact that, hey, we shouldn't be killing human beings in the womb in the first place, and we let more of a pro-life ethic infuse the culture before we try to drag people kicking and screaming against us because they think the only reason we're doing this is we hate women and want them to die in prisons and in the gas chamber. All right. And by the way, if you think that rhetoric is extreme, just go take a look at what the left is saying about pro-life legislation today. So what is more important? Saving the children with a bill that says all abortion is banned, we don't kill any of them, they're all protected, and a bill that says we're going to lead by punishing women for murder. What is the difference between those two bills? Here's the difference. The first bill could actually save lives. The second bill has no chance of passing in today's culture and only alienates, lack of a better word, chicken pro-lifers with no spine who claim to be pro-life politicians, but when it comes time to vote for a pro-life bill, they're afraid to do it because they think they're going to face political backlash. Are people who are afraid to support the unborn going to support a bill that leads with prosecuting women for murder? I don't think so. And the public isn't going to buy it either. This bill has no chance of passing. So why are we advancing these kinds of bills? And the answer from abolitionists is because the Bible says we have to have equal weights and measures, and if we don't, it's an abomination to the Lord. Well, despite pulling that verse entirely out of context, I can tell you right now that the Proverbs were not written by an author that was thinking about abortion. It was not on his mind. He was thinking about much deeper things. But the point is this: we can have a discussion about what penalties ought to be, but should we demonize people who say in the spirit of prudence and wisdom we need to be careful how we introduce our bills and what the timing looks like? You may remember, those of you that have studied history, that William Wilberforce actually pulled back his abolitionist bills in the early 1800s because the political climate was very unfavorable. He actually took them off the table and just kind of tabled them for a while. Said, nope, we're not going to talk about this. Why? Because the culture at the time was convinced that abolitionists were allies of the French in the war that was going on at the time between Britain and France. And by him pushing those bills at that time, he would have only put unneeded obstacles in the way of their future passage. And so he was prudent, and he used wisdom to say, we need to be careful about timing. We need to be careful about how we introduce this and what the cultural moment looks like. That is not compromise. Compromise would be, you don't want slavery to go away, so you put up incremental ways of limiting it, but not banning it so you can continue to profit from it. And there were people in Parliament doing that. And Wilberforce had no patience for them, and rightfully so. But to say, just politically to be prudent, we got to be careful that we don't overplay our hand at the wrong time. That does not make you compromised. That makes you wise. That makes you prudent. And I think there's a point in the pro-life movement today where some of us, whether it's contraception or abolitionism or dividing along denominational lines, we're not thinking prudence. We're thinking about demonizing those who disagree with us. And I think there we should be very, very careful. Why not opt for a good faith discussion that doesn't attribute to our opponents the worst possible motives? We're going to take a break. When we come back, I'm going to talk to you about a friend I have who happens to be an abolitionist. I've had him on this show. And I'm going to talk about what we have discovered in having good faith relationship. We are friends. In fact, I think very highly of this guy. We disagree, but we do not demonize one another. And I'll talk about why I think that matters when we come back from the break. Hello, friends. You may not have time to read a full-length treatment of abortion like I've done in this book, The Case for Life, the second edition, but you may have time to take what amounts to 7 sessions, a week's worth of study if you want to do it day by day, to learn how to defend your pro-life views persuasively. We have a basic course that will help you do just that. You will learn how to make a formal case for the pro-life position. You will learn how to defend it with science and philosophy. Even with non-Christians, you can make a case for the pro-life view. Then we'll teach you how to handle objections, how to recognize the 5 bad ways people argue about abortion, and how they often bring up things that are beside the point. You'll learn to keep the main thing, so that you're in charge instead of feeling like you're in the hot seat whenever the issue of abortion comes up. Visit the website for details. Welcome back, friends. We've been talking about, do we divide or do we discuss? And I mentioned before the break that I have a friend. His name is Jason Storms. I've had him on the show here as a guest. He would support, broadly speaking, the more abolitionist view that our legislation should go for the complete package rather than taking incremental steps. Now, I happen to disagree with him on some points, and he disagrees with me. But here's what you might find surprising. We are actually friends. In fact, I've had him stay at my house. We've hung out together on my back deck, having conversations long into the night. We've sat around fire pits and discussed things. And it's been very cordial, friendly, enlightening. I have learned things from him, and I trust he's learned things from me. And here was a classic example. A few months ago, here in Georgia, abolitionists were trying to put forward a bill that basically allowed women to be punished for the crime of homicide the same way with abortion as they would any other child that dies. Now, is that consistent? Yes. But because of the concerns I mentioned earlier, I was not in support of that bill. And Jason and his friends came and asked, would you be willing to join us at the Capitol and testify in support of the bill? I turned them down for the prudential reasons I've talked about. Now, I was perfectly willing to support a bill publicly that said all embryos and fetuses should be protected from conception, but I did not believe this was the time to introduce homicide or murder penalties for women who have abortions. Now, they disagreed with me on that, and they were probably disappointed they left without me endorsing their bill, but here's the deal. We left not by yelling at each other, but by praying for one another, and with embraces of friendship and talk about looking forward to the next time we can meet, which I very much do. That's the way we need to proceed as pro-lifers. Friends, the culture hates us. Every major institution in the nation is against us. Academia, the media, popular culture, music, entertainment. We cannot afford to fight with each other. Let's discuss rather than divide.